Today we're going to take a look at how to use math in the kitchen. Success or failure in the kitchen comes down to these three elements interacting with each other. That's ingredients, time, and temperature. Now, if we measure these three things accurately, the result is delicious food. But if we get the measurements wrong, our dinner's ruined. That's why kitchen math is so important. By understanding how to measure ingredients, time, and temperature, we take the guesswork out of cooking. Today, all you have to do is get online and you can find almost any recipe you want. But the internet isn't going to make the food for us. We still have to have an understanding of the measuring tools and what those measurements mean. And we still need to be able to do some simple math to create some delicious food. When you're in the kitchen, you want to make sure your hands, the utensils and bowls, the surfaces, and the food are all clean. It's important to wash your hands before and after working with food. And wash your hands again after handling any raw meat, before you touch any other food or utensils. Get enough soap on your hands to make a good lather. Wash the back of your hands, between your fingers, scrub your nails into the palm of your hands to clean your fingernails and wash around the wrists. Wash for about the length of the happy birthday song. Seriously, it works. There are three ways we measure ingredients when we cook. That's estimated measurements, ratios, and calibrated measurements. Now, estimated measurements are based on your taste and your experience. So it just means you sprinkle a little bit of this or drizzle a little bit of that. And then you adjust it based on the flavor. It works great for things like soup because you can always adjust that flavor at the very end. But it doesn't work so well for cupcakes because if you don't have enough sugar, you're stuck. You really can't change that recipe once it's done. Now, another type of measurement is the ratio measurement. Professional cooks use a ton of ratios. They know pie dough as 3-to-1 dough. So that's 3 parts flour to 2 parts butter to 1 part water. Now, it doesn't matter if you use 3 ounces of flour or 3 tons. The ratio is still the same. Today, we're going to spend most of our time talking about calibrated measurements. Now, in the US, we use a system called United States Customary Units, or you might have heard it referred to as Standard System of Measurement. So if you've ever used teaspoons, tablespoons, cups, or ounces, those are all standard measurements. Most other countries around the world use the metric system, which uses measurements of liters, meters, and grams. Packaged food usually shows both metric and standard units, and so do most liquid measuring cups. Today, we're not going to spend a lot of time on metric measurements, but it's pretty easy to figure out if you just remember it uses the decimal system. A kilogram is 1,000 grams. Kilo means 1,000, and milli means 1,000th. 1 milligram is 1/1,000th of a gram. Okay, let's take a look at the standard measurements that are most commonly used in cooking. A teaspoon is the smallest unit. Next is a tablespoon. You can remember that a teaspoon is smaller than a tablespoon by remembering that a teacup is smaller than a table. Next is a cup. In some recipes, you may also see a pint, a quart, or a gallon. These measurements refer to liquid, like a gallon of milk, a quart of soup, or a pint of ice cream. In recipes, you may also see a fluid ounce measurement. A fluid ounce measures the volume of something, the space that it takes up. The other measurements you'll see in cooking will be measurements of weight, pounds and ounces. This ounce is a measurement of weight, and it's not the same as a fluid ounce. Now, this can be a bit tricky because sometimes fluid ounces are just referred to as ounces in a recipe, but it should be pretty obvious which one you're working with. Check this out. If a recipe calls for 8 ounces of orange juice for a smoothie, OJ is a liquid, right? So in this case, ounce means liquid ounce. Most recipes will actually just say 1 cup instead of 8 ounces, because 1 cup actually equals 8 ounces. Most liquid measuring cups will have both cup and ounce markings on the side, just in case you forget. On the other hand, if you're making a recipe like pizza dough, which calls for 10 ounces of a dry ingredient like flour, you don't want to use the liquid measuring cup. This cup only measures volume, and that's the amount of space that flour takes up. It doesn't equal the measurement of 10 ounces in weight. It might seem like a small difference, but in some baking recipes, that small amount can make a huge impact on your final product. If the flour you're using has become very settled and dense, there will end up being too much flour in the recipe. Let's take a look at how these measurements fit together. Tell me how many teaspoons are in a tablespoon. Okay, so you can look it up on your phone, but if you have a basic understanding of how these measurements work, it'll make your life a lot easier. If you don't already have these memorized, take a minute when you're shopping to notice the sizes of containers that you purchase regularly. It can help you become familiar with the measurements. Here are a few tips to help you remember some of the equations. 3 teaspoons equals 1 tablespoon. T has 3 letters in it, T-E-A. The word quart means 4 or a fourth. You already know that there are 4 quarters in a dollar, right? There are 4 quarts in a gallon, and conveniently, there are also 4 cups inside a quart. If you remember that 8 ounces equals 1 cup, remember that from the smoothie recipe? Then with that one fact, you can use some simple math to figure out that 1 fluid ounce equals 1/8 cup, or 32 ounces equals 4 cups, which equals 1 quart. It's also important to know the abbreviations for these measurements. Teaspoon is TSP, or lowercase t. TBSP, or capital T, is a tablespoon. Tablespoons are bigger than teaspoons, like a capital T is bigger than a lowercase. Cup is C, capital or lowercase. That's easy enough. Ounce is OZ. That makes sense phonetically, even if the spelling doesn't match. And LB means pound. LB is an abbreviation of the Latin word libra. In ancient Rome, it was a measure of weight and was a forerunner of the pound as we know it today. Why are we still using that abbreviation? I have no idea, but we are. Let's talk about timers. Now, most ovens or microwaves actually have their own timer function built in, or you could always just use the timer app on your phone. The only thing you have to remember about a timer is to use it. If you don't, you might end up with undercooked food or burnt food. A recipe might give you a range instead of an exact cooking time. One reason is because ovens often vary in cooking temperature. So if your oven runs hot, you might have to pull your food out 10 minutes before someone else would. Or sometimes a range of time will give you the choice in how your final product turns out. So it might say 9 minutes for chewier cookies or 11 minutes for crispier cookies. Start by setting your timer to the lowest setting and then check your food. Add more time as necessary. Just remember, you can always cook your food longer, but you can't uncook your food. Am I right? Thermometers measure the temperature of the heat we apply to our food. You can set the temperature on your oven, but if you find that you're always overcooking things or undercooking them, even when you're following a recipe precisely, then you might want to invest in a simple oven thermometer. That doesn't set the temperature, it just takes it. It reads the actual temperature inside an oven, which could be warmer or cooler than the setting. You can adjust the time accordingly. You can also use thermometers to measure the temperature of the food itself. Now, this is especially important for things like meat, which need to reach a certain temperature in order to be safe to eat. A recipe will typically list the cooking temp, but here are some basic guidelines for oven temperature. A very slow oven, 250 to 275, is used for things like pot roast and prime rib. A slow oven is 300 to 325. This temperature range is used for items that are big, like a turkey or ham. A moderate oven is what you'll see on most recipes, 350 to 375. A great temperature for foods like chocolate chip cookies or bread. 400 to 425 is a hot oven, perfect for things like French bread and pizza. 450 to 475 is still usually pizza, and a really hot oven is 500 degrees. When it's this hot, you're starting to broil. This amount of heat is reserved for things like steaks, chicken breasts, and kebabs. Don't be surprised if you get a little smoke in the house for anything above 450 degrees, unless your oven's absolutely clean. If you don't want any smoke, clean your oven. There are 3 categories of ingredients that we measure: dry ingredients, moist ingredients, and liquids. When measuring dry ingredients like flour, you want to dip your measuring cup in and scoop out a generous amount. Then, level it by scraping off the top with a straight edge like the back of a knife. Don't pack or tap your dry ingredients. If you do, the flour will settle and you'll have too much. If the recipe calls for sifted flour, that's another story. Sifting adds air to the flour to make it lighter. Sift first, then spoon the sifted flour into your measuring cup, and then scrape to level the top. When you use sifted flour, your product will be lighter. If you're using moist ingredients like brown sugar, chopped parsley, or cooked rice, then you do need to pack it in to get an accurate measurement. In fact, the recipe might say brown sugar firmly packed. Let's take a look at some of the instruments we use for measuring in the kitchen. Measuring cups for moist or dry ingredients usually come in sets. Typically, you'll see 1 cup, half cup, 1/3 cup, 1/4 cup. Sometimes you'll see smaller or maybe even bigger. Your recipe may call for 3/4 of a cup of sugar, but most sets don't come with a 3/4 measuring cup. So you just use half a cup and a 1/4 cup to equal 3/4. The same goes for measurement of 1½ cup of flour. Measure out 1 cup, add that into the recipe, then measure half a cup. Add that in as well. That's pretty simple math, right? You can use these cups to measure liquids. It's accurate, but a little messy. It's always easier to use a measuring cup specifically designed for liquids. They have a spout for easy pouring. They are clear and have markings on the side, so when you measure, get at eye level and get a precise read. With these liquid ingredients, particularly with water, you'll see a little bow in the surface. That's called the meniscus. Always read from the lowest part of that meniscus to get an accurate measurement. Measuring spoons are used for both wet and dry ingredients. They usually come in sets: tablespoon, teaspoon, half a teaspoon, 1/4 of a teaspoon. Sometimes they'll go all the way down to 1/8 of a teaspoon. To use measuring spoons, hold the spoon over a container that can catch the spill, then pour in a generous amount. And level it off with a straight edge, just like we did for the other dry ingredients. You never want to pour directly over your mixing bowl, because if you spill, it'll end up in the mix. And even spilling a small amount can have a huge impact on your final product. Some items like baking powder have a lip designed to help you level it off inside the can. Let's talk about the kitchen scale. A measuring cup measures liquid ounces, and that's the volume. But a kitchen scale measures the weight in ounces and pounds. There are a wide variety of scales available. You can get a digital scale or a spring scale. Make sure you check out the range of the scale. This one goes to about 11 pounds. That's the maximum weight it can measure. If you're gonna weigh something that is loose, like flour, you'll need to first weigh the container. Then add the flour. Then take the total weight and subtract the weight of the container. An easier way would be put the bowl on and then reset it to 0. Now all we're weighing is the flour itself. This is called tairing. If you're doing basic home cooking, you'll probably never need to use a kitchen scale. But if you love to bake like I do, then some recipes require very precise measurements by weight, so it might be worth investing in a kitchen scale. A dash or a pinch is an amount smaller than 1/8 of a teaspoon. Pour a small amount into your palm, then sprinkle the desired amount into your dish. Don't skip these small amounts in a recipe. Even small amounts of salt and seasoning can have a big impact on flavor. If you ever have to measure something sticky, like honey or molasses, measure any vegetable oil first. It'll help the honey slide off the spoon for a more accurate measurement. If you ever need to use half of an egg, here are a few tips. Half an egg equals 2 tablespoons, or 1 ounce. You can crack an egg, whisk it, then measure out 2 tablespoons. Or if you have eggs in a carton, follow the directions on the label. There will be times when you'll need to know how to convert measurements. Maybe you want to make a double batch of cookies, or maybe you just want to make a smaller pan of lasagna for you and your friend instead of an extra large family size. The first thing you'll need to do is check the recipe and see how many servings it makes. A recipe will have 3 parts to it. At the top will be the name, the number of servings, or the yield of the recipe, and often the temperature of the oven. That's because you'll likely turn on your oven at the beginning of the mixing process. Preheating will allow the oven to get to the right temperature before your food goes in and starts cooking. The second part is the list of ingredients. And third, the instructions. Today we're going to make one of my favorites, chocolate chip cookies. But before we get started, I'm gonna get all of my ingredients out and make sure I have everything I need. I don't wanna get halfway through the recipe and realize that I'm out of baking soda. As I review the recipe, I'll also look at the number of servings it'll make. This recipe makes 24 cookies. I'm gonna take a plate to work, so 24 cookies is about right. But I'm also going to a party on Sunday, and I did tell them that I was gonna bring a dessert. So if I double this recipe, I can put half of the dough in the refrigerator, and then on Sunday, bring freshly baked cookies to the party without having to mix all of this again. Whenever you're making conversions to a bigger batch from the original recipe, you should always do the conversions on paper first. So let's do that now. We're doubling the recipe, which means we're gonna take each ingredient and multiply it by 2. If you were gonna make half the recipe, you'd simply divide each ingredient by 2. You just have to remember to multiply or divide every ingredient. If you miss one, it's not gonna turn out right. Cool, so let's make some cookies. If you're making something like cookies, pancakes, or cupcakes, make sure your portions of dough or batter are the right size for the recipe. For cookies, using a cookie scoop is an easy way to make sure they are uniform in size, which will mean they cook evenly. Before I made the cookies, I needed to buy the ingredients. Using simple math helped me compare the prices at the store. Every package will list the total weight or the number of items in it. Let's say you have a choice of buying a single apple at $1.99 per pound or a 3-pound bag of apples for $3.49. To figure out which way to buy apples, take the total price and divide it by the unit or serving. In this case, they're both measured in pounds, so we take the total price of $1.99 and divide that by 1 pound. Of course, that equals $1.99 per pound. Then you take the total price of $3.49 and divide that by 3 pounds. That gives you $1.16 per pound. That's a much better deal. Most of the time, a larger bag or box will be a better deal, but not always. So it's worth comparing prices. And even if it is a better deal, sometimes getting the larger quantity is not worth it. If you don't have any extra space to store the product, or if you don't eat it before it goes bad, then you're really not saving any money. In that case, just buy the amount that you need. So that's the basics of kitchen math. We learned about the standard measuring system, how to measure volume and weight, how to use dry measuring cups, liquid measuring cups and measuring spoons, how to double or half a recipe, and how to compare the cost of different sizes of an item at the grocery store. Now it's time to put those math skills to use and make something delicious. Good luck. Bye.